I'm your host Helen Douthwaite Teasdale, and welcome to Brass Evolution, a show where we explore the rich culture and history of the brass banding world. This week I chat to Alex Parker and Eleanor McKenzie from Brass Bands England about the Brass Band archives. We chat about the history of the collection and discuss some of the fascinating items held within the catalogue, as well as how they're being preserved for future generations. Well, welcome Alex and Eleanor to the podcast. Could you give us a brief introduction to yourselves? Do you want to go first, Alex?
Yeah, so my name's Alex Parker, although lots of people in the brass band world know me as Parky. I'm Brass Bands England's membership development manager, so I work across all sorts of things that we do, ranging from the archive that we're going to be talking about today, through to our member services and insurance and commercial arrangements and things like that.
I'm Eleanor. I am an archivist. I previously worked as an archivist at Brass Bands England, cataloguing the Brass Bands archive, and I now work at Heritage Quay at the University of Huddersfield, where the archive is currently on deposit.
We're going to be talking all things brass band archive today in the UK. Either one of you can go with this one, but when was the archive started?
This is probably my side of things, because Eleanor deals with the current and the now, whereas I deal with the history.
Past.
So the collection was actually started by a couple of chaps, Walter Ainscough and Alan Marsh, who developed it as a sort of hobby collection, and they collected music from all over the country, and they did focus on music, but they also collected records and some items of memorabilia and things like that. And that was going along happily until about 2018, when at that point it was based above a funeral directors in Wigan, which was brilliant that they were getting the space for free, but it didn't have a great message for the future of banding being based above a funeral directors. But it was doing some great work in making sure the collection existed. But in 2018, they got given notice that the flat was going to go into use again, and so the owner wanted it back. And at that point, it transferred ownership, because basically it couldn't carry on without the support of Brass Bands England. So it came over to our offices in about 6 transit vans, full to the brim. It's amazing how heavy paper is, and that's why it was 6, because we couldn't even fully load these vans. They were so heavy, and it got stored at the Brass Bands England's offices. It actually took over our boardroom. So for a number of years we were without our boardroom. So it was stored 4 boxes deep across most of the upstairs of our building. And if we're honest, we didn't really know what was in there at that point. And so we started looking around for potential partners who could eventually become custodians of it. And that's where we found Heritage Quay and started the partnership. But before we could move anything there, we needed to know what was in it. And that was going to be a difficult process, because it was a lot of work. And even if we were able to completely staff it with volunteers, we needed some consistency in approach, and that really was only ever going to come from some staff. And then the pandemic hit, which had all the problems that the pandemic came with. But one of the upshots was that there was something called the Cultural Recovery Fund, which was an Arts Council fund to help organisations both ride out the storm, but also come out stronger. And as part of that, we were able to get 2 archivists for most of the pandemic to come and work on the archive collection. One of them, in fact, actually lived in Leicestershire, and because of the pandemic, rather than commuting up and down, ended up moving into a hotel in Barnsley in order to come and essentially sort of live the archive for their pandemic lockdown. And so they were based here, working through and doing what in archive terms is called listing, where essentially it's a list of items, but with not a huge amount of description. And then eventually we realized that to do this properly, we needed to take one step further and do a certain amount of cataloguing as well, which is where you have a bit more information, who the composer is, the name of the piece, that kind of detail that you might expect to want to know about pieces. And then we had a bit of turnover in archive staff, just as normal life resumed and people had other things to get back to. But that's when Eleanor came and got involved. And Eleanor, do you want to pick up the story from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the project at an interesting point about midway through, at which point some of the kind of some of the objects had been sorted, a lot of the photographs, and I got to come in right as we were sorting out some of the scores and the sheet music. So primarily the bulk of my time was spent organising the sheet music. It was a very fun process. I got to work very closely with volunteers at Brass Bands England who know a lot more about music than I do. So they were an absolutely wonderful group to have around. And it was interesting dealing with the scores because we had an existing list that I think was a little bit more detailed than maybe with some of the other parts of the collection, to say the least. For example, the photographs previously had been listed as photograph in the kind of very original list, whereas because the archive started, it also operated as kind of like a lending library. It was good resource to access music. The scores we were very lucky to find had quite a nice comprehensive list. So at that point, what we were able to do as part of the cataloguing process really was kind of cross-reference what we had, whether it matched that original list, and then really just provide a little bit of more detail. So what we were able to add to the catalogue were things like copyright information and additional composers that maybe hadn't been listed, or as is the way with a lot of brass band journals, you've sometimes got 7 pieces listed on a single piece of paper. So it was about making sure that all of that was recorded, really. So I came in at that point, but then also towards the end of my time at Brass Bands England, worked at making the catalogue more searchable, which is when I got to get my hands on some of the kind of objects, the photographs, the instruments, the uniforms. Have some real fun here in the stores at Heritage Quay, having a rummage through the boxes and basically get it into a searchable catalogue online that people could, go through, find the material that they wanted to access and make it publicly accessible.
I think on previous podcast episodes I've done, we've had just one singular photograph with no information, and it's all of the information, all of the research that go behind these objects that make them come to life, really. Other than sort of the scores and the photographs, what other kind of items does the archive hold?
So it's got a real kind of wide spectrum that you might expect from a collection for brass bands. So, and I think it reflects the way it's collected, because it often, items come to us either when a band folds down, or there might be a kind of a clear out going on, so we can get the kind of this, that, the other, and everything. And so one of the challenges is actually working out what's archivable, what's got a real value in history to be kept. So we've got kind of everything from I'm just thinking on the side in the office, we ended up with 2 paperweights celebrating a band's tour. We can only keep one of them because the collection is enormous, and so one is now proudly on display at Brass Bands England, one is in the collection, and then it ranges through that kind of bits and pieces that bands will have acquired, banners. We've got quite one of the kind of interesting items is a hanky that's been that was actually the program for the concert. So it's a square piece of material, and then in the middle is the kind of front cover of your program, and then round the edge is printed the program, what they're going to play, what they're going to do, and that was handed out as a program. We've got a poster around one of Foden's Nationals victories, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, I think that is, and it lists everyone involved down to the guy that drove the bus who gets a thank you. So yes. It's nice to see that kind of an acknowledgement. And then we've got the things that you expect, the music, which is a large bit of the collection, but it's perhaps not the reason for the collection's existence, because this is a collection not just for banding, but for helping the public understand banding in a different way, and why we do it, why we love it. So those kind of things that have a bit of humour about them are useful. We've also got a trophy that was originally gifted to the contest that it was for by Oswald Mosley, who was, you may recognise the name from Peaky Blinders, but he was the leader of the British Union of Fascists in the 30s, and so it's clearly not something that we're proud of, because he wasn't a very nice man. But what it does is it shows that at that time he wanted to be very populist, and brass bands were a key way for him to kind of access a certain part of the population that he wanted to kind of target for his particular brand of fascism. And so that gives us a chance to put brass bands and the communities into the sort of wider context of the UK's social history fabric, and kind of why we do some of the things we do now. And then it allows us to kind of say, but that's how it was, and this is how we go. And it allows us to start using our heritage and our history as an asset rather than a millstone to drag us back, because there's a real importance in that history of bands, but we need to be careful that we don't keep things for the sake of it, rather than embracing the bits that are unique and valuable and culturally interesting. And that gives us a chance to do that.
I imagine that there's such a rich history in banding, and as members of the banding community, sometimes it can come across a little bit niche, if you're not directly involved. However, especially through this podcast and more generally, we know that people across the UK and internationally, they may not be, play an instrument or be members of a band in any capacity. However, they will have knowledge of banding, whether that's through gone to the seaside and seen them playing at the pier playing a concert, or they've done the local gala day, or their granddad was the member of the band. So it's just how we make these archives accessible to, say, those who aren't involved in the movement sort of firsthand. But there's such a rich history there.
Yeah, and I think it's that realization that so many people in the UK will have done, I call it sort of brush along with bands, where they've just touched upon it. They've seen them in the park, they've been to a friend's concert. But at Brass Bands England, we estimate that there are millions of people that watch brass bands each year, whether that's in passing. They often say that there's 1 million people that go to Whit Fridays in attendance across the whole area. Some of them will just be passing and see part of it because they're from the local area, but some of them are going all the time. So it really is culturally ingrained within the country to a greater and lesser extent with each individual. But I think a great thing about this project is that, and I'm sure Eleanor won't mind me mentioning that Eleanor doesn't come from a brass band background. She's an expert archivist, and that's why she works on it. But for me, it's great to do a project that we are able to include non-banders as well as banders. Our volunteer team that Eleanor mentioned are real experts in the banding knowledge, and they're still learning things as we go through. I'm sure they'll admit, and they find that's why they get involved and find it fascinating. But it's useful to me to see how people like Eleanor react to what we're doing, because I think sometimes we think brass banding is more niche than we really appreciate as a community. The things we do are pretty niche, but they are understandable to people, and it's probably a chance for Eleanor to jump in and
I was
talk about that.
To say, actually, Parky can attest to this. I came in not from a banding background, or frankly a musical background. I know about 3 chords on guitar, and that is everything. And I came in with plenty of knowledge around archives, not so much about brass banding. But through working with the material, you realise just how pervasive brass banding actually is. I may not be in a brass band, but I remember plenty of times being caught in a traffic jam as my local brass band marches
I'm
down
sorry.
the road. Oh, don't you worry, I love it. It's lovely to see. By the end of the year, I'd had the pleasure of going to the European Brass Band Championships, seeing some of the best bands in Europe. I've been told I was very lucky that was my starting point.
You started on a high there. I mean, where'd you go from
there?
Yeah,
I think so. I've already decided I would love to play percussion, because I think it's incredible the way they run around at the back of the stage. But I do think there is something in the archive that everyone can connect to. I think bands come out of a sense of community, sometimes competition, and as a competitive person, I definitely relate to that a little bit. But you realise the more you work with the material, the more you can recognise so many different aspects of banding, even if you have never been a cornet player yourself. And it's really interesting as well the way that the archive sort of tracks changes in the banding community as well. We're seeing more and more of an increase in women composers. We've got a fantastic contemporary piece in the collection that commemorates Sarah Everard, and the composer of that piece actually gave us permission to use that when we're promoting the archive or Women in Banding as an organisation. So it's interesting to see already the ways that the archive is being used to maybe challenge some of those traditional conceptions of what a band looks like. Most bands I have met are actually 50% women, a lot of young people, which is definitely something I hadn't realised before working with the archive. And through working with the archive and working with the banding community, I think it's very safe to say that the passion is so infectious. It's really sort of hard not to walk away with that same level of excitement.
That's so good to hear. Having been, Alex, you can maybe attest to this as well, but having been brought up through the brass band movement, it's infectious. We're all very passionate people, as you know. So I'm very happy to hear that sort of enthusiasm comes across so strongly for the people maybe outside the movement or getting involved in the movement. In my last episode, I was talking to Dr. Joanna Ross-Hersey, and similarly, you can track these social changes throughout I think we were talking around the late 1800s, 1900s crossover into World War I and World War II, and that change for more women becoming involved in brass bands, etc. So the depression, all of these things going on in the background that affect the movement, and hopefully we can keep that going. Eleanor, I was just going to ask you, or Alex as well, maybe you can both help me out here, but roughly how many items does the archive hold at the minute?
I've got that in front of me because it's just one of those numbers that I can never remember because there's so much in there. So we've got about 9,000 sets of sheet music, 5,000 journals. So that's things like historic copies of British Bandsmen, but also other magazines that have existed over time. We've got about 1,000 vinyl records. Unfortunately, we actually don't have any CDs. That's something that's missing in the collection. That when it was handed over to us, I suspect the CD collection that was collected is probably still with somebody. So unfortunately, we haven't got any of those. We've got 180 sort of textile banners, the stand banners that people will have on their stands in concerts and things like that. So if you and that's something that's interesting because it gives us a good record. It's very visual that we can use in display. So if you are having a set of stand banners made, consider getting an extra one knocked up and sending it into the archive because it means your band gets represented in the collection. We've also got some uniforms here and there, trophies, photographs, and other in the archive term ephemera, which is sort of the bits and pieces like the paperweights or the things that people have had made to kind of celebrate particular activities. So yeah, there's a lot in there. And I think a good story that's probably worth sharing is that because what the archive isn't is a lending library of music. It's an academic resource. People can use the music, but we have to work with you to do it because we've got to balance all the copyright legislation about letting the music out for free. The collection can't be seen to undermine publishers and things like that who've got a right to make a living out of the work that they're creating. So what we don't keep are 2 copies of solo cornet parts. And the reason we don't, and anything else that's sort of got double parts, because when we were looking at it, we realised that if we fish all of these out, we will save 43 meters of shelving in the collection. And because the collection's stored at Heritage Quay, where it's not just some shelves in a room, this is a state-of-the-art facility. The oxygen level is lowered so that there can't be a fire. There's sort of flood protection in place so that if there's water sensed, that it sends off the alarm and people come and sort it out before it damages the collection. All the shelves roll backwards and forwards so that they can get as much in as possible. But even then, space is at a premium at a sort of state-of-the-art facility like Heritage Quay. So doing that meant that we can have the potential to kind of keep more and be a kind of better provision going forwards. So that's kind of interesting part of the process that we've been through to get it live. And I think there's probably a little bit more news to share. So the archive was eventually, after the work that we've been doing to list and catalogue, and towards the end of Eleanor's time with us, we were able to go live to the public again. So in just around the Yorkshire regionals was when we went public at Heritage Quay, and we had a bit of a launch, and there was a display in the sort of museum section at Heritage Quay. And so that the collection's open to the public again now. You can go on the Heritage Quay website, which has everything listed and searchable. You can arrange with the team there, which includes Eleanor now, to have items brought out. They also do digital observations, so that if you can't get to Heritage Quay directly, they can sort of show you. And they've got a really clever camera set up so that it projects down and you can see the things that you're looking at in detail over something like a Zoom call. Other hosts are available to put the VVC hat on, but that's kind of open, and we do encourage people to go and have a look and get involved and see that. But we've also, and this is the kind of brand new news that's not been out there before. We've just been awarded just under £200 less than £100,000 from the National Heritage Lottery Fund to support the archive going forward. So that will mean that we're able to keep an archivist working on the collection for this bit of the project, but we're particularly able to fund some of the outreach that we want to do, and that's all about how do we make banding more prevalent and obvious in the wider community, so that we're going to be able to bring in some school groups to do 3 days at a time in the collection. So they'll be doing their whole curriculum based around what's in the archive, using the stories about people from the archive and bringing it to life throughout their kind of wider curriculum. So we'll do bits of science with how do we preserve items. We'll do some music. We'll involve our brass foundations. We'll do some drama to find the people that have interesting lives from inside that, and we'll apply that in the drama, the English. So it's about showing that these stories are interesting, exciting, and aren't just about music, but it's about society and life as a whole. Because I think that's as you were saying, we've grown up in the brass band community, and that's part of it. It's for lots of people, it's not just the music, it's life. It's the group that you associate with, the people that you see week in, week out, that kind of thing. So that's where there's some exciting work to go ahead. We've got it live to the public, but it's not the end for the archive, and it's going to be a great tool for our community going forwards.
Fantastic news, and so good to hear that the archive it's just a resource there for everyone to utilise, whether you're part of the brass band community or whether you're a local historian, researcher, school group. In any capacity, you can come and use these resources, and it just brings everything to life. That's basically it. Sort of final question from me, but do you have a favourite item from the archive?
Oh, so I have two. The wax cylinders, just because I think they're really fascinating. Kind of, those original records, they're just so cool to look at. And then there is two photographs that I absolutely adore. One is a band stood outside of a factory in the pouring rain, and the other is a band down in a mine. I dread to think how their lungs felt after playing down in a mine, but there's just something very recognisable about that group of friends from work. They're all in the same uniform, and there they are playing together on what looks like quite a miserable day, but making the most of it. And I think those photographs especially kind of represent for me what banding is very much about, that sense of community and joy. Yeah, I think they're my favourite items, but it is very hard to pick out of, so many.
I appreciate that.
And it's probably worth telling the story of those cylinders a bit more. These are two sort of I think they're Edison wax cylinders, which was sort of one of the earliest forms of recorded sound, and we've got two of them in the collection, but the box says music by Silver Band, so we have no idea what's on these or who it is. So one of the things we're hoping to do with this funding that we've just received is have those brought back to life, find a way to have them played and digitized, because that's the key, because these things are so fragile, and it will only have taken somebody to have left them on a radiator at some point in their life that there's nothing on them anyway. So we kind of really want to see what state they're in, and whether we can kind of hear that music from the past, because we think they're from the 1800s, so it's really, really early stuff, and there's a sort of interesting thing to pull apart in there. My favourite item, though, is a tiny weeny little cup that we've got, and it's about the size of an egg cup, but it's got handles, and I forget what the prize was, but to me it just shows that kind of sense of achievement. Just to have something as small as that can mean so much to somebody, that they felt it's worth preserving in a collection like this. And I think that's a nice summary of why banding is the way it is, the competitive elements that we do have, but ultimately it's all about leading to a sense of pride and self-worth in what we're doing. And I think that's a nice little kind of summary of why we do what we do.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time. I'm going to put links to all the resources from Brass Bands England, links to the archives. Fingers crossed that we find out what's on these cylinders, guys. I'm hoping that we can, it'd be so nice to hear what's on there. If there's anything in there, but, it's one of those things. Thank you so much, both, for your time. And,
you're welcome.
Please visit the website, visit the resources, visit the keys, and thanks again, both of you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if anyone wants to come in, they can just book online or they can give us a call. We'd be happy to book them in. And if we do get the wax cylinders digitised, that will be very exciting because we have computers in the research room where you can actually listen to the recordings.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This week I'm asking listeners to help the Brass Evolution community grow by leaving an honest review on whichever platform you're using. I really love to get feedback from listeners, and your opinions help me to develop the podcast and expand it. If you like the podcast, let me know. Your feedback is really appreciated, so thank you in advance. Podcast music is Mephistopheles, performed by the Illinois Brass Band.